Hey YouTube, it's Faye, and for today's video, we're going to tackle the top 3 most common coolant leaks in the Toyota 5.7 liter V8 engine, as seen in this lovely Tundra behind me, but also found in the Sequoia, the Land Cruiser, and the Lexus LX570. And those 3 are radiator, water pump, and heat exchanger, also known as the valley plate. Now this is going to be a really thorough, in-depth DIY tutorial. I'm going to make this so thorough and detailed that you cannot possibly fail. That being said though, this is an intermediate level job, so if all you've done is like an oil change, maybe this might not be the job for you, but just stay tuned and see. If you feel comfortable doing the water pump, then I guarantee you can do this entire job though. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. I'm going to take you through the tools that you're going to need, the parts that you're going to need, and then let's get into this job. Tools you're going to need to do this job, and maybe some you aren't. There's obviously some redundancy here, so please just watch the video, see how I use the tools, and see for yourself what tools you want, which tools you don't really need, but we're just going to go through them. I've got a 5-gallon bucket that I use for my coolant with my coolant lift pump. I've got a funnel, and I also have a fluid vacuum pump, a drain pan, lots of cardboard, gloves, rags, and a vacuum. Now I've got a little marker. I like marking things. For removing the fippage, the form in place gasket, I do like this little bristle brush. I also use a little bit of Scotch-Brite, but not too aggressively on the aluminum, people. You'll see how I use this. Hose pick, gasket scraper. These are freaking champions for this job. You definitely want a pair of hose pliers. I use some little snips with some zip ties, a 90-degree pick, little pocket pry bars with magnets on the end, obviously. I've got 90-degree pliers, flathead screwdriver, some hose pliers, a mirror on a stick, a trim clip removal tool. I've got some wrenches. I have a ratcheting 10mm. I have this long 8 and 10, but I use it for the 10. I also use 2 12mm wrenches at the same time. One just happens to be ratcheting, doesn't have to. Then this little teeny tiny 1/4-inch drive ratchet that swivels with a little 10mm socket on there. Got some extensions, a 4 and a 6-inch, sockets, 8, 10, 12, wobbly 12, 14, ratchet, battery power, air power. Obviously you can get away with just hand tools with this job. Now this is another essential tool of the job in my opinion. It is $25, but this just makes your job so much easier. So if you're doing a bunch of work with form in place gasket like this, just highly recommend. Just wait till you see the video, you'll understand. Otherwise you can use something like this, which comes in the fippage kit, but once again, this was a game changer for me when I bought it. Magnetic stick. 2 different types of pry bars. I love this ratcheting one and you'll see why. And then I've just got this little pry bar, a 22mm wrench. Doesn't have to be offset like this. Any 22mm wrench will do. That's just what I happen to grab. A torque wrench, also essential. Oh, a little blowgun for cleaning, absolutely essential. Then I've got some tape and some plugs just for covering over some holes just so crap doesn't get into the engine. Zip ties aplenty, some carbon choke parts cleaner. I happen to like this better than brake parts cleaner because it doesn't leave behind a residue. Petroleum jelly or silicone paste, either of these work. Little WD-40. Now, parts that we need for this job. We need a radiator. This truck got upgraded today and you'll see it. Oh my God, is it freaking beautiful. Lots of coolant. You're gonna need at least 5 gallons for the Tundra. Then the water pump. If you get it from the dealer, it comes with a gasket and it comes with the O-ring for the water neck. Speaking of O-rings, you'll also need 2 for the water pipe that goes into the valley plate. Now you've got the O-ring and the valve for the oil separator plate. You're gonna need at least 1 tube of form in place gasket, and you're gonna need 2 intake gaskets. Now one thing that is not here, because I did not replace it on this truck, and you'll see why, are the 2 metal gaskets for the air valves, where the air valves connect to the air tubes that then connect to the manifolds. All right, so that's your parts, and that's your tools. Let's get into it. Well, you're never gonna believe this, but I'm gonna have you start this job by draining the coolant. I'm draining this into a bucket. Now you could save this coolant and reuse it if it's fairly clean, but this is 5-year lifespan coolant, so I'm definitely gonna be exchanging it today. Underneath the truck, you can clearly see those telltale pink coolant crusties starting to form on that seam in between the plastic tank and the radiator core. Now let's finish the drain and finish up underneath the truck by removing this lower radiator hose and lowering the truck down to the ground. Yes, I have a lift, but this can all be done with the vehicle on the ground. I just have a tool and I'm going to use it. Now I removed the radiator cap to release a vacuum and allow the coolant to drain faster, removed the engine cover, and now the upper radiator hose. Now we'll remove the fan. I like to use the double wrench method on these 12mm nuts, one holding the fan, the other loosening another nut. But what do I do about the last one? I'll stick a little pry bar in there. Now I'll set the fan gently inside the shroud. I'm not worried about it indenting the fins on the radiator or anything because obviously we're going to be throwing this thing in the garbage soon. And I'm going to remove the two 10mm bolts for the fan shroud, the little overflow hose, and then lift the fan and the shroud out together as a unit. Now we're going to remove the 6 clips that hold on these deflectors. There's also a little electrical clip on this side, on the driver's side. And then here is the piece on the passenger side. So we're gonna pull all those out and both of these are gonna come off. Now we have 4 bolts holding the radiator. See in there, 1, 2, and then down below through that hole, you can see one over there, the other one in there. I'm gonna start with the upper ones. Got my 12mm socket. 3 of the radiator bolts came out easily, but this last one was giving me a little bit of trouble. And normally I would take my time, hit it with some more penetrating lubricant and resonant frequency, but I also knew that I'd be able to run away from this problem, so shamefully I just sent it and broke the thing, knowing that I had a replacement bolt and not wanting to invest the time into it. Now let's lift the radiator out. Now we're moving on to removing the intake plenum. Let's unclip the air filter housing, remove this 8mm throttle body hose clamp, unclip the mass airflow sensor connector, and then detach these ventilation hoses from the plenum, which conveniently have 2 different size bolts, a 10mm on the passenger side and a 12mm on the driver's side. Under the air intake tube is the vacuum hose for the fuel pressure regulator that you'll want to remove, and then detach both of these hoses from the valve covers and lift the whole air intake tube out of there. I like to cover the open holes so nothing accidentally gets into the engine. Now let's disconnect the throttle body connector, and dear Lord, okay, it looks like this one was broken previously and held into place with some RTV, which does work great, just not for future removal. So I'll get a new connector housing on order. So you can buy a set of 2 of these on Amazon for $10, and these actually are common to break, so I try to keep these and a bunch of other common connectors in stock. So what I actually do is I'll pull out all these wires, and then I'll save these. I'll save the wires in case I ever need to do a wire repair, but the wires on the vehicle are good, so I'm just gonna rob this connector housing and swap that on. And there it is, installed. You will see this magically change at some point during the video. Now we have a couple coolant bypass hoses for the water-cooled throttle body that have to be detached. Then let's grab these electrical connectors for the purge and ACIS VSVs and disconnect these hoses. Fun fact while we're here, ACIS stands for Acoustic Control Induction System and functions by basically opening or closing a valve inside the intake manifold to change the airflow for performance and fuel economy. Okay, now remove the front ventilation hose and let's remove these beautiful foam pieces. Then on the back side of the intake manifold, there are 3 points of attachment where the wire harness clips onto small brackets. They're difficult to get to and even harder to film. So here's the plenum off the vehicle just to help. This is the one that I just showed you in that last clip, but these 2 on the back are nearly impossible to film. So you see this one and this one, which sit right next to the air valve. And to unclip these, you're gonna push in towards the brackets, then pull up on the tab and then pull out. Now remove these 2 10mm bolts that attach this air pipe bracket to the back of the plenum. Then detach the hose and remove this whole piece out of the way. And lastly, let's unbolt the plenum. Now I needed to get this purge hose out of the way to reach the fastener, and unfortunately it was brittle and it broke, so we'll have to replace that, but no biggie. I'm just gonna stick some bulk hose on there and send it. We have 2 nuts, 8 bolts, and the wire harness in the back passenger side corner that always seems to get stuck on, and let's lift this thing out of there. That's it. There's the leak. Before we do anything, I'm gonna clean up the ceiling surfaces here and then put some tape so nothing falls in there. I even covered that up too. We're gonna remove this foam carefully because it's old and likely gonna just disintegrate. Get to the foam. Oh geez. And then this foam back here. Ugh. Now we're just going to unclip these fuel lines just so they're loose, and then I'm gonna pull off these hoses for the air valves here and just get those out of the way. Down here we've got a 10mm bolt holding this little clamp on. Now we have another 10mm bolt for another clamp for these little air hoses. Now we've got a lot of movement on these. You just want to be really careful with these. They are super fragile. Now I'm gonna disconnect this electrical connector right here, so get that off of this bracket, pull the little hoses out of here, and then I'm gonna very carefully disconnect both of them from right here and pull them off and get this out of the way. Now before I get to the next step, I wanna hop into here for just a second and let you know that suddenly, in the footage, the engine looks incredibly clean for some unknown reason. I'm going to explain that so you don't get confused. About halfway through filming yesterday, all I was using was my GoPro up there on the hood looking down. And when I went to download all of the footage on lunch, I realized that the GoPro had corrupted half of the files. So tons of my work was gone. So I ended up reassembling everything, thinking I was filming it, and because I lost everything, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I never should have let my GoPro fail me again. Now I'm gonna be using it as target practice. I drove an hour-and-a-half round trip and picked up this little thing, but now I will be redoing this job because I want you guys to have this tutorial, a really good in-depth tutorial on this so badly because it doesn't exist out there yet, I don't think. So this is my dedication, you guys. Anyway, that's why everything is so clean. I'm literally redoing this job for you step by step, and maybe the footage is gonna change. I don't know, because I've never used one of these before, but in case you're wondering why the video quality has also changed, that's what's going on. Okay, now back to the tutorial. Okay, so we're free here, and we're free there, and then I'll go ahead and take this little clip off so that these have a little bit more movement. We can sort of treat them like two separate tubes, and then this is bulky and will get caught when trying to pull it out. Some people will leave these in place. I've seen that, and just like zip tie them out of the way. I think it's just so easy to pull them out, and then you don't have to worry about breaking them. So that's gonna be the next step, and just watch how we do it. What I'm gonna do is just push back these little squishies, and then here they start to hit, so just gently lift them up. Kevin. So now that this little air pipe assembly is out of the way, we're gonna very carefully, perhaps break them, but very, very, very carefully remove the knock sensor connectors. And check this out, this is really cool. You can't possibly mix them up unless you just don't pay attention at all, but do you see how the passenger side are like this lighter gray color, and the driver's side, the connectors are black? And then clearly you can tell these are the front ones because the electrical, the wiring is longer, and it's got this little tab for where it sits. Oof, how badly do I not want to reenact this, because it was a miracle that these all came off, honestly, without me breaking anything. But for the sake of this tutorial, you guys, we're gonna be pushing this in. So push the connector towards the sensor itself. Push down on the tab very gently, and then I like to take a flathead screwdriver and help pry it off. Okay. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't plug the rest of these back in all the way. I didn't want to break them, so we're gonna unplug the rest of these. Wow, I can't believe it. I didn't break a single knock sensor connector. That's amazing. Then what I actually do is, because these tabs are so brittle, there's always a chance you're gonna break these while you're prying up on this little plastic clip. So I just cut these. I just cut these and pull these out because these are easy to replace once this whole unit is out. So now that this harness is free, there's a 10mm bolt back here in between the two air valves that holds the harness bracket into place. So we're gonna pull that out, and then that frees up this. We're gonna go ahead and just pull this out of the way, and we can just tuck it back here for now. This is gonna be a little bit different for yours than it is for this vehicle. Now here in Texas, we don't have emissions, so this is something that you'll see fairly often on the 5.7 liters around here, and that is this extra harness. This is a secondary air injection system delete kit, so this is an aftermarket harness. Once again, I'm just gonna tuck that out of the way a little bit more. Now to remove the air valve assembly, we've got 1, 2, 3 12mm bolts, and then we've got two 10mm bolts on either side of each valve that attach them to the pipes that go to the exhaust manifolds. So then we get to struggle with that next. Now the front two bolts are the same size. The back bolt is much longer. I've got my teeny flex head ratchet with 10mm socket to get back into that tight space. To break them loose, I use this long wrench. It's just got an 8 on one side and a 10 on the other side. And yes, that is my blood. I'm just gonna warn you that the little metal gaskets in there are extremely sharp, so be careful. Now you're gonna have to do the driver's side first, because the passenger side, you gotta move everything, shift it that way. Push this back a little bit, because otherwise this bolt here is just gonna hit the side of the block. So you'll see how I've got it pushed sort of a fair amount back. And these are sort of hard to film. I'm gonna do my best. Once again, breaking it loose with my long 10mm wrench. Keep in mind, it was not this easy the first go round. I just put everything back together real quick so that you guys can see this in its entirety. And now all that's left is that back 10mm bolt. Now, we'll just pull these guys out. Be careful, because the two gaskets, they should stay on the pipes, but you might lose them. Oop, see, I lost one. Now these are the one-time use gaskets that you are gonna wanna replace. I'm not going to in this case, and you're gonna see me reuse these. And the reason is that these air valves are no longer operational, so whether or not these seal does not make a difference on this particular vehicle, but you are definitely gonna wanna get new ones of these and replace them. Now we're gonna remove the whole oil separator assembly. We're gonna start in the back. We have these two 10mm bolts. So now note, we have two different sizes here. This long one goes into the plastic housing, and the shorter one goes into the heat exchanger housing. So just make sure that you make note of that and separate them or label them accordingly. Next, we're gonna get this little coolant hose out of the way. I like to tuck that right up in there. And then we have one 10mm bolt, two 10mm bolt, and three 10mm bolt. And now from here, just pull forward and up. On this side, there's an O-ring. It's supposed to be one-time use. Could you reuse it? Maybe. Mine's awfully hard though. I don't think that's sealing. Now I could also clean it up and put some form-in-place gasket on there and probably be fine. All right, so now the star of the show. Here's the actual valley plate itself, where this leak is coming from, and I'm gonna remove all these 12mm bolts and nuts. But first, let's grab our 12mm socket and pull out all four of these knock sensors, because there is a little bit of overlap on the valley plate and they will end up being in our way. Now I should mention, in most cases, yes, please loosen the block drains and get more of that coolant out. But in this case, this vehicle is so rusty. I was afraid those things were gonna snap right off in there. So the less invasive, the better. Now I love this little gear wrench pry bar for this, because I can just like angle this little thing around the head by just pushing this button. It ratchets whatever direction I want it to, but I'm not gonna move it right now because I want it to be like this. And I will just place it underneath these tabs, and you just gently pry on those tabs that are provided for you. Also, there's this flimsy little tab here which you can get stuck on. I'll just pry it back sometimes, and then when you're done, you can just bend it back into place. No harm, but that'll just help you clear it. So at this point, we've got these two O-rings to get past, so I'm gonna lift up and push the valley plate that way. Let's get this out of here! And of course, this crucial clip that I absolutely could not have left out of this video was also corrupted by my GoPro. But at least I salvaged this very pleasing clip of vacuuming out the coolant from the valley plate. Not only do I want all this out of here for the sake of my complete coolant exchange, but I also don't want the coolant contaminating the form-in-place gasket material. So really the best thing to do is get this area completely clean and dry. Very cool. So the next step is to clean up all of this old fippage, just clean up the sealing surface really, really well. So I'm gonna get all the gunk from out in there. We don't want anything contaminating the cooling system. But I think you guys have seen enough of my cleaning time lapses for one video, so we're just gonna snap our fingers and it's gonna be clean. Heck yeah! Now I'm gonna clean off these bolts. We're just gonna get these going on the wire wheel here real quick. Oh yeah, we're loving that. Alright, I know I said I'm not going to show you a time lapse of cleaning, but this is actually a crucial step that I didn't want you to miss out on. So what I'm doing here is I'm spraying compressed air into every single one of the bolt holes. Then I'm doing my best to suck up whatever comes out with my shop vac to keep from transferring the mess from one part of the engine to another. Now, the reason this is so important is because you don't want any coolant to come up from the bolt holes while you're threading the fasteners in and then contaminating your sealant while you're putting everything back together. So after I spray all the coolant out, then I go back in with some solvent and spray it out one more time just to make sure it's totally dry and clean. Overkill? Maybe, but I've never had to do this job twice. Well, except for today. Now we're gonna clean the sealing surface of this one. And then also just got some dirt in there, so I might take it outside and pressure wash it real quick. All right, there it is, looking good. So everything's clean and ready to go, and I've got everything prepped and laid out. My torque wrench preset to 16 foot-pounds, my 12mm socket and ratchet, as well as my bolts and nuts all cleaned and prepped. Let's get some new O-rings on our pipe. And these are actually in decent shape, but I'm not gonna risk anything with them. We're just gonna replace them, they're so cheap. Let's get all the old coolant crusties out of there. Then a little silicone paste. Or petroleum jelly works too. But just some sort of grease that's not going to interfere with the coolant, because these can actually roll pretty easily when you go to install them. So just a little extra stickiness to keep them in place isn't a bad idea, but then also to help push them into place, just sort of gently glide in there. So coolant is slippery too, but this really helps out. And then on this surface, I'm just gonna clean off any coolant debris. It gets like kind of crusty in there, so I'm not messing with the sealing surface, that's pretty clean, but just knocking down any coolant crusties that might catch that O-ring and make my life a little more miserable. And then also in here, I'm gonna put silicone paste. I'm just gonna set myself up for success here, people. Now I'm gonna repeat that same process for the hole in here. So once again, a little bit of Scotch-Brite, I'm not going crazy on it, you guys. I'm not digging into the aluminum. And a little silicone paste in there. And now it's time to apply our form in place gasket. But let me actually get that pipe installed first, because once we lay down the sealant, the clock starts ticking. You want to install the pipe pointed up at an angle, and you'll see why in a second. And it says specifically that it wants 3 to 4 millimeters diameter bead here, and we're going to apply it in a continuous line as shown in the illustration. So let's just double check here. Here is the tip that I'm going to be using on my form in place gasket, and it measures between 3 and 4, so that's good. So if you look closely at the tip here, you can see the different lines. So you can cut those to get different diameter seal beads, but this is that's kind of the most common size, so usually just cut it on that first one. And this is the gasket material I'll be using. Remember I mentioned at the beginning of this video that this $25 tool was so worth it, especially if you're gonna be saving big money doing this job yourself. Make your life easier by using a tool like this to apply that sealant seamlessly. You can see that nice even bead that I have going all the way around. It's not too thick and not exceeding that 4 millimeters as specified in the repair manual. Now, if you miss a spot or have a thin spot, just go back with your tool and do a little touch up. Never spread this around with your finger because that introduces dirt and air bubbles, which will not form a good seal. Now keep an eye on the time because you have to install the valley plate cover within 3 minutes of laying that first drop of sealant, and you're gonna have to torque the bolts within 15 minutes. And I get stressed out with a time crunch, so I like to have everything completely ready to go so I'm not fumbling around trying to find and set my torque wrench while the clock is ticking. And you saw how I slid that plate onto the end of the pipe while it was up at an angle, then gently set everything down into place as a unit. Now the torque spec is 16 foot-pounds as I stated, and we have to wait at least 2 hours before adding any coolant. Look at that, beautiful. Okay, so now the repair manual does say to wait at least 2 hours before starting the vehicle. In ideal situations, what I like to do is get to this point by the end of the day. So I actually let this sit overnight and then come back to work the next day and get everything reassembled. But unfortunately, things don't always work out the way that you want to. So in this case, the GoPro messing everything up kind of messed up the flow of the day that I had planned. So what I'm gonna do instead, while I let this sit and cure, is I'm gonna move on to another one of the most common 5.7 liter coolant leaks, and that is the water pump. While the fippage is curing, let's go ahead and move on to our third most common 5.7 liter leak, which is the water pump. Now before I loosen the dry belt tensioner and pull the belt off, I'm just gonna loosen these 4 bolts for the pulley because we are gonna be reusing the pulley, and it's a little bit easier to get them off when we have the tension from the belt holding that pulley still for us. Now I've just got my 14mm socket, and we're gonna loosen this a little bit. And take off, come here, this pulley. Now, you don't have to do this. I am gonna take the drive belt all the way off just so that I don't get any coolant on it because this drive belt is fairly new. I'm not gonna be replacing this today, but you could definitely leave it on to save yourself some time. I'm also gonna remove this little wire harness clip here just to give us a little bit more room because I wanna zip tie all this out of the way. And I'm doing that just by squeezing in on both of these tabs with my little fingernails, so I'll get that out of the way. Now we're gonna get this water bypass pipe and thermostat out of the way and disconnect these metal hoses. So we got a couple 10mm bolts. Just give me a little more room to wiggle this one off. I find it easier to remove that super short rubber hose when I have a little bit more movement, and pulling the hoses out of the way makes it easier to access the water pump bolts. I'm just gonna pull this out of the way a little bit. So now we have this hose clamp here, which this little hose goes into the housing, and then we have 3 bolts holding the housing onto the water pump itself. These are these smaller 12mm ones. We have one here, and one in the back there. So I'm gonna do my best to get these for you, but it's just loosening bolts, people. It's loosening and removing 3 bolts. So we're gonna get this one. Pray that the clamp doesn't break. We'll just give them a little help. There you go, you wanna move now? Another reason I'm glad I removed the drive belt. Goodness. I should probably take off the radiator hose, but I just don't want to mess with this clamp. Let's just do it. It's going to make it easier for me to get... I always take this off. Why am I being weird now? I was all nervous for no reason. All right, you hang out down there. So now... onto my coolant catching cardboard. Yay! So now we're onto the water pump itself, and you can see this is part of the water pump. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 12 and 14mm bolts. I am gonna remove them. Now, I'm sure that this is not the greatest view in the world since I still have a lot of these hoses in the way, but just bear with me. I will put a diagram up on the screen for you so you can see the location of every single one of these bolts. I'm just loosening the 12s first here just to make it easy. Our long one, which as you can see does have some sealant on there, so we're gonna make note of that. Now we got the 14s, also with the goop, also with the goop, and here we are. Check this out. This is something that could have so easily been overlooked because it didn't have those typical pink Toyota crusties just like growing all over it, right? But we can see that there's some coolant here starting to crust in the weep hole. This is not something you would notice on the vehicle because of course you have the pulley on top of it. What I did actually was I just got a mirror in the last inspection. I got a mirror and I saw sort of these little telltale signs of some little crusties coming down, but these should in theory last the life of the engine. And here's the reason why they don't, people. It's because people see the Toyota super long life, the pink coolant, and their service interval is 5 years or 100,000 miles. 5 years, 100,000 miles. Okay, how many people do 100,000 miles in not 5 years? Pretty much everybody. So if you're not flushing your coolant every 5 years, this will happen. It's sort of, I'm not sure exactly, there's like some sort of chemical reaction and it starts to break down the water pump. It also breaks down these gaskets. It can actually cause head gasket failures over time as well. So such cheap insurance to just flush your coolant every 5 years, people. That is way cheaper than doing a head gasket or even doing a water pump. So anyway, we're gonna clean up the sealing surface and I'm gonna clean up those bolts that had that goop on there, the ones that go through the timing cover, and let's get this new water pump installed. Here we have the end result, looking good. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start with the 12mm bolts, and I'm gonna start with the short ones. Now we've got this long one, of course, which goes in this hole right here, which you can tell is like deeper than the rest of them, right? Because the other ones you can see the threads. So we know that this one is a lot deeper, right? So we're not gonna make that mistake. And then here we have these two 14mm bolts that are also gonna have some fippage on there. So I'm gonna do the 3 long ones last. I'm gonna get the gasket in place, the water pump in place, and then I'll worry about these bolts. And let's just get this thing installed. Let's not overthink it here. I got my service manual ready to go because the bolt torque specification is a little bit confusing. So you can see that bolt A, B, and C are listed here. I just installed all of the C bolts. So these ones are going to be 15 foot-pounds. So I'll go ahead and torque those. Now we have our long 12mm head bolt, which is bolt B. This is going to be 17 foot-pounds, and we're going to put a little bit of form-in-place gasket on it. And lastly, the two 14mm head bolts, which are bolts A. We're going to torque them to 35 foot-pounds and also put a little fippage on them. Water pump portion installed. Now let's get that water neck back on, but first let's grab our new O-ring. I cleaned up the gasket sealing surface here on the water inlet housing, and I took all the bolts to the wire wheel real quick and just cleaned them up. And here's the new rubber O-ring for the water inlet housing, and this just came in the box with the water pump from the Toyota dealership. Now in theory, this O-ring has these little knobbins that like should hold it in place when I put it there, but I just like to put a little petroleum jelly in there and just to make sure that it doesn't fall out while I'm installing the water inlet housing. Whatever excess I do have, I'm gonna put in this little hose just to make it easier to pop this back up into place. Now whenever you reuse these spring style hose clamps, make sure that you put them exactly back where they were so the indentations match as best as you can. And the torque spec for those is 15 foot-pounds. And if you're a veteran to my YouTube channel, then you know what I'm gonna say. Installation is just the reverse of removal, but I'm gonna go through with you guys anyway, just in case you're following along with this tutorial step by step and you wanna do it along with me. The first thing I'm doing is getting the pulley installed with these 4 bolts. And yes, there is totally a torque spec for these, and you can grab that pulley with a pulley holding tool and torque them. But honestly, I just give them a little bit of air power and I've never had a problem. You can do the same thing, or I'll put the torque specs on the screen right now. Just gonna use a little petroleum jelly to make sliding these hoses on easier. Next, I will be reinstalling my drive belt. So if you happen to take yours all the way off like I did, I'm gonna put the belt routing diagram on the screen right now in case that it helps. I'm also going to link my drive belt video, which shows very, very in-depth tutorial on how to install the drive belt. So in case you need that, you can click that link. But otherwise, we'll just sort of speed right on through this part. And before I put the radiator hose on, I'm also going to replace this busted hose clamp. And of course I got this one from the dealership. There is the part number. Incredible! We are more than halfway through this job. All right, now let's reconnect our little water bypass hose. Let's install all 4 of our knock sensors, and then let's get that oil separator plate prepped and ready to reinstall. Now here we have a one-time use seal. Oh God. Oh yeah, so not only is mine super brittle, but it's also cracked. So definitely one-time use. We'll be replacing this. Here's the new one. There's the part number. Now let's just quickly wipe out any dirt or debris on the sealing surface before we push this seal into place, which I just do by hand. While we're here, we're so deep in here, why not? Let's just go ahead and replace this valve. This is the part number. So I've got my 22mm wrench. Ew. Oh man. So check this out. When I shake these, hear how you can barely hear anything on this one, but then the new one, you can actually hear that ball valve moving. So this is, I'm glad we're doing this today. So once again, little petroleum jelly, just to lubricate that O-ring. Not too tight. Now on this side, there is also supposedly a one-time use O-ring. And I do see it. There is something rubbery there. Yeah, I'm feeling something rubbery. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I've never replaced this ever. I put a little form-in-place gasket on the end of the oil separator plate itself. And then when I reinstall it, I just, once again, let it sit for a little while before actually starting the vehicle. No problem with that though, because it's gonna take us a while to get those air valves back in place. So now remember earlier on I said just bend these out of the way so we can get the valet plate up easily. Look how easy it is to just bend this tab back right into place. So that just really helps. And then you got to push the whole thing forward because I bent the whole thing backwards. But Now let's install these two 10mm bolts. Remember, the shorter one is on the inside, the passenger side, and the longer one is on the outside or driver's side. Now there is no sugarcoating this. Reinstalling these air valves absolutely freaking sucks. I'm sorry. The only pointers I can give you is that we're going to be installing the passenger side first, just so we can have a little bit more wiggle room and get to that front bolt that's otherwise going to be blocked by the block. Now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall these old gaskets. You're going to put on your new gaskets. And honestly, I don't even have to torture myself with these in this instance, but I'm going to do so because I want it to be technically accurate for you guys. So let's get these installed. Now I'll just slide the valve assembly back into place. And you may have noticed that I tightened up those tabs on the metal crush gaskets so they had a stronger grip on the pipes. That really helps them not budge during installation. All right, so you can see I got both of the 10mm bolts in for the passenger side pipe, and they're pretty much just finger tight at this point. I'm gonna make them a little bit tighter, but what I wanted you to see is I do have a pry bar here that I use to push against the pipe. So I get that back passenger side bolt first, just so I have everything lined up, and I know that my valves are in the right spot. Then I go in with the pry bar, push this back, and then get this front bolt, and then I just tighten them both-ish by hand, but not super tight because I still want some movement for getting to the other side. Okay, for the other side, really no special tricks here. Just that gasket, keeping that in place is a challenge. Whew, all right, got both of them in on that side as well. Now, as you saw, that gasket does like to creep down. So what I'll do in that situation is I will push the valve down, and then I'll pry with just a little pocket screwdriver against this little notch right there, like so, and I'll just push the gasket back up into place. So now, before we tighten the pipes down all the way, we're gonna reinstall these three 12mm bolts to secure the valves to the block. Now you can finish tightening the 10mm bolts on the air pipes, but not too tightly because the torque spec is only 7 foot-pounds. All right, let's put that wire harness back in place. We've got our gray on this side, our black on this side, and of course we cannot forget to plug in our air valves. Now we're putting our wire harness back. So we've got this shorty little 10mm bolt that goes right there on that bracket. Then plug our knock sensors back in, then zip tie the harness. Then, can't forget this little guy, holds our fuel lines into place right there. All right, it's time to wrestle these little tubes back in. Very exciting. Then pushing both of the air tubes back onto each of the air valves. Then reinstalling that bracket for the tubes and tightening down that teeny tiny 10mm bolt. Now I'm gonna reconnect the air hoses. All right, well, I don't really have much commentary for this particular segment of reassembly. This is once again just the reverse of that initial removal. Now let's put this lovely foam back into its happy little home. And now we have this lovely, beautiful foam that goes right here. Well, this is exciting. Now we're gonna prep the intake plenum for reinstallation. I'm removing the old gasket and cleaning out the sealing surface before I install my new gasket. And while I was there, I noticed, ooh! Okay, while I'm here, I'm gonna go ahead and clean the throttle body. Now, you want to move the throttle plate extremely slowly when you go to clean it. You don't want to hear the motor make any noise at all. So what we're focusing on is, not really so concerned about how clean the throttle plate itself is, but it's the sealing surface. When carbon builds up there, it holds the throttle plate open and change the value. It can also interrupt the airflow. So after you clean this, do keep in mind that it can cause the engine to run a little funky or idle a little funky, just because this is a learned value. So if it's really, really bad and you go to fire the vehicle back up and it idles all messed up, just give it some time, or you can disconnect the battery cable and reset it. But I don't like to do that because there's many other learned values that I don't want to reset. So anyway, that's all we're doing. That looks good. And then once again, just close it very, 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 very gently. You do not want it to make any sound. There we go. Now let's get our new gaskets installed. These are the exact same part number. They're the same both sides. The gaskets have this cool design which features these tabs that hold them into place when you flip the plenum over. Now let's remove the protective tape that we placed over the intake runners and let's slowly, carefully drop the plenum into place. Now forgive me while I block the camera for a second and give the engine a little bear hug here as I reach back into the depths to plug in our 3 wire harness clips. Then I have open hole anxiety, so I plugged in that ventilation tube next before installing all of the 8 bolts and 2 nuts that secure the plenum. Now, the repair manual does say to uniformly tighten the fasteners in several steps, and the torque spec is only 15 foot-pounds, so don't over-torque these people and go through in several passes. Now let's get this pipe reconnected. Now we've got these 2 coolant hoses for the throttle body. And then of course our new throttle body connector. Now I'm reattaching the air hoses for my VSVs as well as reconnecting those electrical connectors. And you remember almost half an hour ago in this video that I broke that brittle purge hose, so I'm replacing that now with some bulk hose and some worm style hose clamps. Now of course these lovely foam pieces. Probably should have put those on before I reconnected these, but honestly I forgot about them because most of the time vehicles don't even have them anymore. And then our air filter, and then our intake, so we can't forget to remove our little covers, obviously my glove. Now I like to put the air box in place and then connect up this hose and this hose. Then got my clamp, 8mm, mass airflow sensor connector. Then over here, our 10, plug it in, and our 12 hose clamp down on there. Then the 4 clips on the airbox. And now, finally, for the cherry on top of this job. Holy, wow, that is stunning. Oh my God, I am such a sucker for quality parts. Look at this. And you know me, I'm Toyota OE everything. I mean, look at all the parts we put on this truck so far. But I love this high quality all aluminum CSF radiator. You can see that it's literally solving a problem. Now, granted, this truck does have, what, 230 something thousand miles on it. So this radiator has done a really great job. It's lasted a long time. But as you can see, this happens to them over time. In between the aluminum and the plastic, there's a seal in here that just starts to fail. Look at this. No way that thing's gonna leak, right? Oh my God, and it's so pretty. This is so pretty. I mean, I wanna hang this on the shop wall and frame it, but no, let's get it installed. Another good thing about replacing the radiator is, remember this bolt that I broke off inside of that one at the beginning of this video? Well, now I get to run away from my problems, and thankfully I have another one that is very, very similar in my Toyota Bolt bin. Love it. Now I'm gonna lower the radiator slowly down into place, and you're gonna wanna have your fasteners handy since this doesn't hang on anything. I've got one of my top bolts, so I'll be able to thread it in by hand as I hold the radiator close with the other hand. I've got the 2 top bolts started. Now I'm going to also thread in those 2 bottom bolts by hand. Now we have our plastic air ducts. And then we'll get all of our little plastic trim clips back in. The aftermarket radiator fits these clips perfectly. So now we're gonna install fan and shroud. I dropped the shroud and fan down in together as a unit. Then I tightened just one of the fan nuts just to keep the fan from falling into our beautiful brand new radiator. Then I tighten up the shroud with those 2 10mm bolts up top just to keep it from getting in my way as I continue installing the fan. And the lower portion of the shroud just slides into those clips on the new CSF radiator, just like factory. Then I tighten up all 4 of our fan nuts. Gonna grab my 12mm wrench. Now, as they start to get tighter, then I'm just able to turn it and get to that other one that I could not reach before. So I'm back again with my favorite little weird gear wrench adjustable head pry bar, and what I'll do to tighten these, just make sure that they're tight, is I'll just wedge the pry bar against one of the nuts while I tighten the other nuts. Yeah, that's tight. Now I'll do that for the other 3. All right, all the nuts are tight and marked. And you know, I used to get made fun of at an old job that I had like over a decade ago now. Like, what are you, a noob for marking? No, I need to be able to sleep at night. This is a big job. So, all right, now let's attach the upper radiator hose and the lower radiator hose, and let's fill this darn thing with coolant. While we're underneath the truck, I just wanted to make note that, as you can see here, this CSF, the drain cock, is torqued and it's marked. So that's awesome. But one thing you should always do, which I kind of took for granted because it's this lovely radiator, is that you always want to make sure that that is tight before you install the radiator. Same if you have any transmission cooler lines, which this one obviously does not, but it's just something I wanted to note. All right, now it's time to fill this beast with coolant. So if you've watched any of my other YouTube videos before, especially ones that involve coolant, then you are no stranger to this tool. I love this little coolant lift pump. This video is long enough as it is. I can already feel it. This is very information heavy. So what I'm gonna do is just fill the coolant, get the job done, and link right here my video all about this lovely little coolant lift pump and how to use it. And I'll also link this in the description below. Also, you can just pour coolant in there and burp the engine in the normal way just by running it, and that's fine as well. But I prefer this one because it also has a built-in like leak check. So I put the system under a vacuum, let it sit for 10 minutes while I do other things. In this case, I'm going to clean and detail the engine cover while I'm waiting. You know, you can tell within a few minutes. If it holds a vacuum, then you know that it's gonna be fine. You don't have any leaks, you can go ahead and send it, and then we'll fire her up and go for a test drive. I've got my Toyota coolant here in a bucket, ready to go, ready to be sucked into the system. Hold it down with nice firm pressure. Now I'm pulling vacuum until the needle gets into the green on that gauge. All right, so that's where it stopped. That's as far as it wanted to go. And you can see the system is definitely under a vacuum. So I'm gonna go detail that engine cover real quick, and I'll come back and make sure that that has stayed still and hasn't budged. And then my vacuum check is complete, and I'll fill the system with coolant. Sheesh, look at that. Just use a little bit of soapy water that I use for finding air holes in tires, and some of this 303 protectant, and that looks amazing. But that took a little bit of time. So now let's check on our vacuum. Oh man, we are good. Time to fill. Get our pickup tube in the bucket, and let's go to town. While the power of the vacuum forces the coolant to rush into the engine, we're going to keep an eye on this bucket just to make sure that that pickup tube stays submerged and that we have enough coolant. We don't want to suck any air into the system. Okay, when you see the little air bubble form in the hose, then we know that it has done its job. So that's all for this tool. But now we're going to swap over to the no spill fill funnel. This fitting screws on like a radiator cap, but features a sturdy base that the funnel can slip into without tipping over. And this creates a steady supply of coolant to the engine as we burp the cooling system. So I'm gonna fill this up to about the halfway mark after topping off the radiator, so we have enough in there to make up for the air bubbles in the cooling system working their way out, as well as allowing for coolant expansion as we heat cycle the engine. Damn, she's thirsty. You can see that I'm squeezing the upper radiator hose to help coax out any air bubbles. The cooling system capacity on the Tundra is massive, and then plus adding in a larger radiator. But finally, I'm able to fill the funnel to the halfway mark and fire up the truck. Let's go. All right, cool. I like to let the engine run until it gets close to operating temperature, just opening up the thermostat and further circulating the coolant. And this is when I perform a visual inspection of everything I just touched. Looking at the drive belt, the fan, the hoses, the shroud, and just make sure that everything is looking good and I'm not seeing any signs of leaks. Then I'll shut the engine off and allow it to cool down. Sometimes I'll put a fan on it while I clean up my tools. Sweet! Now that we've let the engine run for a little bit and then turned it off and let it cool back down, everything's still gonna be hot, so just be careful. We're going to remove this, fill the reservoir, and then we're gonna take this vehicle for a test drive, let it heat all the way up, let it cool all the way down, then do our final coolant top off, and then we're ready to go. Squeeze the hose, yes it's hot, and then I'm gonna put my stopper in. That's gonna prevent any coolant from leaking when I remove the funnel and the little fitting. Now I'm placing the leftovers over the overflow tank and incrementally draining coolant out by pulling out the stopper just a little bit until I reach the full line. And since I'm all done here for now, I'm removing the fitting and replacing it with the radiator cap. And then of course the cherry on top, our nice, clean engine cover. Oh, look at that. What a difference between before and after. I'm so pleased. This is great. This went great. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, but most importantly, I hope that this video gave you the confidence that you need to tackle this job, or these 3 jobs rather. And yes, these are 3 big deals, 3 major coolant leaks, or seeps in this case. But think about it, people. This truck has 250,000 miles on it and it's just barely broken in. So absolutely worth putting the effort in to do this job. So get out there, get to it. I wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll do my very best to get back to you, as I always do. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.
I'm sorry, I drank it all. Yeah. Yeah. That's a chicken. Bless you.